She grew up in a small, quiet neighborhood where most people knew each other by face but not by story. From early childhood, she was different. While other children ran and played, she often lingered near old, forgotten things. There was a second-hand piano tucked away in the corner of her house. Its keys were uneven, some sticking, others worn smooth from years of careless touch. But to her, it was the only friend that seemed to understand. When her fingers first pressed down and produced a sound, she felt a strange connection, as if the piano had been waiting for her all along. Her family did not understand her love for music. They struggled to make ends meet, and music, in their eyes, was a luxury they could not afford. They reminded her often that the world would not pay attention to someone who could only play a piano. She was told to focus on practical things like helping at home or learning a skill that could earn money. But the piano called her back every time. Late at night, when the household had quieted, she would sit on the worn bench and press the keys. Each note felt like a secret she shared with the world. It was private, yet powerful. In those moments, she felt free. And her heart found a rhythm that no words could capture. At school, she kept mostly to herself. Classmates were curious about the quiet girl who carried a notebook filled with musical notes instead of doodles or stories. Some tried to make fun of her, whispering behind her back, calling her strange or useless. But she ignored them. She knew the world outside the piano was harsh, full of judgments she could not yet change. She found comfort in imagining herself in grand halls, playing before people who truly listened. She imagined the sound carrying through spaces far bigger than her small, dim room, and she allowed herself to dream. Her teachers noticed something different about her too. Occasionally, she was asked to play for small school events. When she did, her music would float gently over the crowd. Even the teachers, who were strict and practical, found themselves pausing, listening closely. There was something in her touch, in the way her fingers glided over the keys, that made people stop and pay attention. But despite these moments, most adults treated her like a child with a passing hobby. No one expected her music to go beyond the school walls, or to matter in a larger world. She had a best friend. Someone who did not judge her for spending hours with the piano instead of joining the usual games. They would sit together in the garden, talking about life, about dreams that felt impossible, and about music. Her friend believed in her in a way no one else did, often telling her one day they will see what you can do. Those words, though small, were like sunlight in her lonely world. They encouraged her to practice longer, to explore melodies that scared her, to push the piano into spaces even her mind had not yet imagined. The years passed, and her skill grew quietly. She learned to play complex pieces from memory, often staying up through the night, perfecting a single phrase. Her parents still did not understand, and sometimes they expressed their frustration. "You need to be practical," they said. "People do not care about dreams when they are hungry." But she kept going. Music had become more than a hobby. It was her way of speaking, of living, of being seen in a world that often ignored her. Eventually, a situation arose that she could not ignore. A dispute at a public place, one that questioned her honesty and integrity, threatened to take away not only her possessions, but her reputation. People who had never known her personally started whispering, judging her without understanding. She felt the weight of disbelief pressing down from every direction. The world that had ignored her music seemed ready to punish her for being herself. Her heart sank, but the piano remained as steady as ever. Reminding her that she still had a voice, she prepared for the upcoming challenge. In the same way she had prepared for every difficult moment in her life, alone, quietly with music. She practiced melodies that reflected her feelings: anger, fear, hope, determination. She imagined walking into the courtroom, the walls towering, the seats filled with skeptical faces, and letting the piano speak what words could not. She realized that the same skill people had dismissed as a pastime might become the only way to prove herself. People in her life tried to advise her to compromise, to accept what seemed inevitable. Friends who had supported her for years now said, "Maybe it is better to give up. It is safer." But she could not. She knew the truth about herself and the world she carried inside. The piano had taught her to trust her instincts, to believe in her own strength even when others did not. So she made a choice. She would confront the skepticism, the judgment, the doubt. And she would do it in a way that only she could. On the day of the event that would determine her future, she felt the familiar nervousness that always came before a performance. She adjusted her posture, checked the piano, touched the keys lightly, and let herself breathe. The room was filled with people who had already formed opinions, and she could feel their doubt pressing in from every corner. Some whispered to each other, some watched silently, and a few simply ignored her. She knew she was underestimated, dismissed, and perhaps even mocked. But she also knew something else. She had a story that no one could take away. And it was waiting to be told. As she sat there, ready to begin, she thought back to all the nights she had spent in that small room, alone with the piano. Each mistake, each note played imperfectly, each melody created in the dark hall of it had led to this moment. She realized that the judgment of others, the disbelief, skepticism, they could not reach the truth that she carried inside. She had practiced not just music, but courage, patience, and focus. The piano had trained her hands, but also her spirit. The moment her fingers touched the keys and the first note rang out, something remarkable began to happen. The room filled with doubt seemed to pause. Conversations halted, whispers faded, and even the people who had come to see her fail leaned in slightly. Drawn by a sound that was unfamiliar but compelling, she played with precision, emotion, and intention, letting each note carry the weight of her experience. The music became her voice, telling a story that words could never fully capture. As the melody unfolded, she could see the reactions changing. Skepticism softened, curiosity grew, and even the harshest faces could not hide a flicker of surprise. They had expected a timid performance, a girl overwhelmed by circumstance. Instead, they witnessed something alive, strong, and undeniable. Her fingers danced across the keys, creating a rhythm that mirrored the beating of her heart. Each pause, each crescendo, each delicate touch spoke of resilience, of dreams that refused to be crushed, of a spirit unbroken. By the end of her performance, the room was quiet, as if the music had suspended time itself. People shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. The laughter, the judgment, the disbelief, it had been replaced by silence and awe. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel a sense of triumph. Not over others, but over all the doubts and fears that had shadowed her life. She had done more than play the piano. She had made the world listen, even if just for a moment, to her story. In that silence, she realized something profound. The piano was never just an instrument. It was a bridge between her inner world and the outer world that refused to see her. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful way to be heard is not through words, but through the patience, discipline, and emotion carried in every gesture. She had grown in a world that underestimated her, but now, in that moment, she understood that being underestimated was a gift as well. It had taught her to prepare, to believe in herself, and to wait for the right moment to shine. People would talk about this performance for years, but she would remember it for different reasons. She would remember the nights alone, the hours of practice, the quiet determination that kept her moving forward when no one else believed. She would remember the look on faces that had doubted her, now transformed by the undeniable truth of what she had created. And she would remember the power of her own hands, the strength of her own voice, and the beauty of a talent nurtured in silence and revealed in courage. After the first hearing, the whispers began to spread faster than she expected. People who had never met her personally, and who only knew of her through rumors or passing remarks, started to form their own judgments. Some said she was hiding something, some said she was lucky, and some dismissed her entirely. Her past struggles were brought up as though poverty or a quiet life made her less worthy of being heard. Every day felt like walking through invisible walls of doubt, and she could feel the weight pressing down on her chest. She had never faced anything like this. Until now, her challenges had been personal, small, and mostly private. But this was public. This was a courtroom filled with strangers, each of them convinced they knew who she was, what she was capable of, and what she deserved. She could see the doubt in their eyes, the way they whispered under their breath, the small smirks of those who believed her dreams were meaningless. Her heart sank. but she forced herself to breathe, to focus, to remember that her strength did not depend on their approval. Her family was unsure what to do. They wanted to protect her, to tell her to give up and save herself from embarrassment, but she refused. She had learned over the years that no one could fight this battle for her. She had to stand alone if necessary, and prove that she was more than the assumptions people made. At night, she returned to her piano, letting the music carry away her fear. She played the melodies she had composed over years of quiet struggle. Note a promise to herself that she would not be defeated by disbelief. The days before the next hearing were filled with tension. Every interaction felt like a test. People she knew casually would look at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Even some of her closest friends were unsure how to support her, worried that the world would see them as foolish for believing in someone so underestimated. She realized that she could not rely on anyone else's faith. The only thing she could depend on was herself and the music she had nurtured for so long. She practiced constantly, not just on the piano, but in her mind. She imagined the questions, the accusations, and the skepticism she would face. She imagined herself responding calmly, confidently, with clarity and grace. Yet she knew that words alone might not be enough. She felt that music could express what words could not. It could show her truth, her honesty, and her dedication in a way that would be impossible to dismiss. And so, she prepared, not just for a legal battle, but for a performance that might define her life. On the day of the second hearing, she arrived early. The room was buzzing with anticipation, but the energy was not supportive. People were curious, yes, but curiosity mixed with judgment. Some whispered about her appearance, her background, her chances of succeeding. Others openly doubted her intelligence and capability. She felt their eyes on her, some sharp, some doubtful, and yet she walked in with steady steps, keeping her head high. Trying not to let the fear of judgment cloud her mind, she sat quietly as the proceedings began. Lawyers spoke, evidence was presented, and witnesses gave their accounts. The more she listened, the more she realized how easy it was for people to misinterpret facts, to twist truths, to overlook important details. She could feel frustration rising in her chest, but she remembered the piano, the silent support that had been with her since childhood. She promised herself she would let her music speak if words failed her. Her opponents were relentless. They questioned her integrity, her motives, her every action. Each accusation was like a small hammer, pounding at her confidence. Some were subtle, others more aggressive. But she remained silent, observing, learning, and waiting for the right moment. She understood that losing her temper, losing her focus, would only give them more reason to dismiss her. She had to be patient, strategic, and courageous. When a break came, she retreated to a quiet corner near the old piano in the hall. It had been moved there temporarily for ceremonial purposes, but she saw it as a sign. She touched the keys, feeling the familiar grooves and uneven textures. Each key responded as if it recognized her struggle and her determination. She closed her eyes and played softly, letting the music calm her nerves. The notes carried her thoughts, her fears, and her hope. For a few minutes, she felt that no one could touch her. No one could question her truth. During the break, she noticed a few people watching her with curiosity rather than skepticism. They were not yet allies, but they were listening, truly listening, to the story that her hands told through the piano. She realized that this was more than a performance. It was a revelation. The music was a bridge between her private world and the public scrutiny she faced. It was a chance to make them understand something that words could never fully convey. The hearing resumed, and tension filled the room again. Her opponents pressed harder, trying to intimidate her, to shake her confidence. They spoke over her, ignored her objections, and treated her as if she were invisible. But she remained steady. She remembered the long hours, the discipline, the countless mistakes she had corrected in private. She knew that the truth was on her side, and the music she had practiced could reveal it in a way nothing else could. When the judge finally asked her to respond, she made a bold request. She asked if she could explain her side using her piano. There was laughter and some murmurs of disbelief. People thought she was desperate or foolish, trying to avoid a serious discussion. but she calmly insisted, explaining that music could express her honesty and dedication more clearly than words alone. The judge, curious but cautious, agreed to let her try. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a tool of truth. She approached the piano with steady steps, her heart racing, but her mind focused. She sat down, adjusted her posture, and took a deep breath. As her fingers touched the keys, the room fell into an expectant silence. People leaned forward, unsure what to expect, some still skeptical, some quietly hopeful. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the music flow, letting every note carry the weight of her experience. The melody began softly, almost like a whisper, drawing listeners into her world. Each phrase told a story of struggle, patience, and perseverance. The notes reflected her emotions: fear, hope, determination, and courage. She played with precision and heart, weaving a narrative that no spoken words could match. The room seemed to breathe with her, caught in a rhythm that was both delicate and powerful. As the performance continued, the reactions in the room shifted. The skeptical faces softened, the murmurs ceased. And even her opponents seemed to pause, caught by the authenticity of what they were hearing. The music revealed her character, her dedication, and the truth of her intentions. It was as if the piano itself spoke on her behalf, filling in gaps that documents and testimony could not cover. She realized that this was the moment she had been preparing for all her life, and she poured everything she had into it. The performance reached a climax, with rapid, confident passages that displayed both skill and emotion. Every note was intentional, every pause meaningful. The room was captivated. It was no longer just a courtroom. It had become a space where honesty and talent transcended judgment. When the final note faded, silence fell like a blanket over the audience. The impact of the music lingered, creating a moment of reflection and awe. She felt a sense of accomplishment, but also humility, knowing that the power of her music had opened eyes and hearts in ways words never could. After she finished, people took time to absorb what had just happened. The room was no longer filled with doubt and disbelief. Instead, there was quiet respect, a recognition that she had faced tremendous pressure and had revealed her truth through an art form that demanded attention. The piano had done what no argument or explanation could. It had spoken for her, shown her integrity, and demonstrated her commitment to her own path. That day marked a turning point. While the legal matter was not yet resolved, she had gained something more important: recognition of her voice and her strength. People began to see her differently, not as a timid, underestimated figure, but as someone capable of remarkable courage and skill. She returned home that evening, exhausted but fulfilled, playing softly on her own piano, letting the music wash over her and reinforce the confidence she had gained in the days that followed. The story of her performance spread quietly through the community. Friends who had doubted began to express support. Strangers who had been curious became genuinely interested. And even some who had opposed her started to reconsider their assumptions. She knew that her journey was far from over, that more challenges awaited. But she also knew that she had found a power within herself that no one could take away. The piano had been more than an instrument. It had been a teacher, a companion, and a voice for the truth. Through it all, she remained humble, focused, and determined. She continued to practice, to compose, and to prepare for the moments ahead. Each day was a reminder that belief in oneself mattered more than the opinions of others, and that courage often required patience and quiet persistence. She understood that life would continue to test her, but she had discovered a way to face those tests with grace, strength, and the unwavering knowledge that her story could be heard, if not by words. Then, through the language of music, the courtroom seemed to stretch endlessly, a room filled with anticipation and unspoken judgment. After her last performance, many expected her to falter, to be overwhelmed by pressure or doubt. But she was different now. Every day since the previous hearing, she had prepared herself mentally and emotionally, understanding that the upcoming moments would not only test her ability, but also her resilience. Her hands had touched the keys countless times, each practice reinforcing not only her skill but her confidence. She knew the challenge ahead would be unlike anything she had faced, and she welcomed it with quiet determination. When she entered the room, the atmosphere was charged with curiosity and skepticism. People whispered behind their hands, questioning whether her piano could truly convey her truth. Lawyers spoke in hushed tones, casting glances at her with a mix of amusement and doubt. Witnesses who had previously dismissed her now watched more carefully, uncertain of what to expect. She could feel their eyes, some sharp, some skeptical, some curious. Yet, she walked with a calmness that belied the storm of emotions she carried within. She had learned to anchor herself, to find strength in the quiet moments before the storm. The judge looked at her with mild surprise, perhaps recalling the performance that had silenced the room before. There was a hint of expectation in the air, but also uncertainty. The hearing began with standard procedures. Arguments were presented. Witnesses gave testimony, and the weight of doubt seemed to press down even harder than before. The room was a web of assumptions, each word carefully chosen to support preconceived notions. She felt the pressure, yet she did not let it dominate her. She remembered the nights spent with her piano, the hours of solitary practice, and the music that had become her voice. Her opponents were relentless. They challenged her credibility, questioned her motives, and scrutinized her every action. Every accusation felt personal, designed to make her appear small, weak, and unworthy of being heard. But she stayed composed, responding calmly and thoughtfully whenever she was addressed. Words alone were not enough to convey her truth, but she used them to buy herself space, to hold attention, and to prepare for the moment she knew would come, the moment where music would speak for her. During a recess, she wandered to the quiet corner where the piano had been set up. It was the same old instrument, worn and imperfect, yet it felt like home. Her hands brushed over the keys, feeling the familiar grooves and textures, and a wave of calm washed over her. She played softly, letting each note carry her emotions, her fears, and her determination. She felt the music resonating not just in the room, but within her, reaffirming her courage and her purpose. In that moment, she understood that the piano was not merely an instrument, it was her voice, her ally, and her shield. When the hearing resumed, tension filled the room again. The opposing side pressed harder, attempting to intimidate her, to create doubt, and to challenge her composure. They underestimated her, as many had before. But she had learned to transform underestimation into strength. She listened carefully, noted every point of contention, and waited for the right opportunity to reveal her truth. She did not react impulsively. Instead, she let her preparation and patience guide her. Finally, the moment arrived. She asked once more to express her perspective through her piano. The judge, curious and perhaps somewhat skeptical, allowed it. A hush fell over the courtroom as she approached the instrument. She adjusted her posture, took a deep breath, and let her fingers rest lightly on the keys. The silence was profound, almost reverent, and she felt the weight of expectation pressing down. But she welcomed it, knowing that this was her moment to show, not just skill, but honesty, character, and perseverance. She began to play slowly, each note deliberate and expressive. The music was more than sound. It was narrative, emotion, and truth woven together. The opening melody was soft, almost fragile, conveying her vulnerability and the struggles she had endured. As she progressed, the notes grew stronger, more confident, reflecting her resilience, courage, and determination to stand against doubt and disbelief. Listeners leaned in, their attention captured by the story, unfolding through sound. She played with a sense of purpose that transcended technical skill. Every chord, every phrase was intentional, conveying aspects of her journey that words could not fully express. The music reflected years of preparation, nights of solitude, and moments of quiet courage. She could see the faces of those who doubted her slowly transform, their skepticism giving way to curiosity, awe, and perhaps even respect. The courtroom, once filled with whispers and judgment, was now united in focused silence. The performance continued, with crescendos and decrescendos mirroring her inner turmoil and triumphs. Rapid passages reflected her determination and drive, while delicate phrases conveyed the vulnerability and uncertainty she had faced. Each note carried the weight of her experiences, telling a story that had been dismissed, ignored, or misunderstood for far too long. The audience could feel her emotions, her dedication, her unwavering commitment to truth and integrity. As she reached the climax of the piece, she poured every ounce of energy and emotion into the music. The room seemed to pulse with the rhythm of her heart, captivated by the authenticity and power of her expression. Even those who had come to see her fail could not deny the depth of feeling, the precision of execution, and the honesty that radiated from her performance. For a brief moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only her, the piano, the truth that she communicated through sound. When the final note faded, silence enveloped the room. The impact of her performance was palpable, leaving everyone in a state of reflection and awe. People shifted, unsure how to respond, as if they had just witnessed something extraordinary that defied expectation. The laughter, skepticism, and doubt had vanished, replaced by recognition and a profound sense of understanding. She had done more than play. She had revealed her character, her integrity, and her strength in a way that transcended words. The judge looked at her with a new understanding, acknowledging that her music had conveyed truths that testimony alone could not. Lawyers and witnesses exchanged glances, silently recognizing that she had faced immense pressure and had emerged with dignity and authenticity. The courtroom atmosphere had transformed, and she sensed that perceptions were changing. Her story, once overlooked and dismissed, had begun to be understood. After the hearing, people spoke quietly among themselves, reflecting on what they had witnessed. Some approached her to express admiration, others to ask questions about her approach, and a few simply nodded, acknowledging her courage. She felt a sense of quiet triumph, not over her opponents, but over the doubt, fear, and disbelief that had shadowed her journey. The piano had become more than an instrument. It had become a voice that could communicate what words could not, bridging the gap between her inner world and the skepticism of others. In the days that followed, her performance became a topic of discussion. People shared stories of how the music had touched them, how it had revealed a truth that documents, testimony, or arguments could not. Friends who had previously doubted her began to express genuine support. Strangers became interested in her journey, and even some who had opposed her started to reconsider their assumptions. She realized that the act of expressing herself through music had not only revealed her integrity, but also had the power to inspire understanding and win empathy in others. Despite the growing recognition, she remained grounded. She continued to practice, to refine her technique, and to prepare for the challenges ahead. She understood that the legal matter was not yet resolved, but she had discovered something more valuable: the power of her own voice and the strength to stand firm in the face of doubt. The piano had taught her patience, discipline, and resilience, and it had shown her that courage often required quiet persistence and unwavering belief in oneself. Her days were filled with preparation, reflection, and music. She composed new melodies that mirrored her journey, each one a testament to the challenges she had overcome and the truths she was determined to convey. She played not just for herself, but for the audience that had witnessed her growth, the community that had underestimated her, and the world that had not yet fully understood her. In the process, she discovered a sense of purpose and fulfillment that went beyond recognition or approval. Through it all, she maintained a sense of humility, recognizing that her journey was ongoing. The piano remained her companion, teacher, and voice, reminding her that strength comes not only from talent, but also from perseverance, courage, and belief in oneself. She had learned to face challenges with grace, to transform doubt into motivation, and to communicate truth in ways that transcended words. And as she continued to prepare for what lay ahead, she knew that her music would remain the bridge between her inner world and the world that had once underestimated her. The day of the final session arrived. Carrying a quiet intensity that filled the air in the courtroom, she could feel the weight of every gaze, every whisper, every expectation pressing down on her as she stepped into the room. The people who had once dismissed her presence now watched with curiosity, some silently skeptical, others quietly hopeful. She understood that this day was different from any she had experienced before. It was not just a test of skill or talent. It was a test of courage, character, and the ability to remain steadfast when faced with overwhelming judgment. She took her place near the piano, adjusting the seat and placing her hands lightly on the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes, allowing herself to breathe and to connect with the instrument that had been her companion and voice for so many years. She thought about the long nights spent practicing, the challenges she had faced alone, and the moments of doubt she had overcome. All of it had led to this moment, and she felt a sense of calm determination wash over her. The proceedings began as usual, with lawyers presenting arguments and witnesses recounting events. She listened attentively, noting the emphasis, the assumptions, and the gaps in understanding that pervaded the courtroom. Her opponents were relentless, attempting to discredit her at every opportunity. Yet she remained composed, speaking only when necessary, her words measured and deliberate. She had learned that sometimes silence, paired with preparation, could be more powerful than a flurry of words. Finally, the judge asked if she wished to respond, and she calmly requested permission to express her perspective through the piano once again. Some murmured in disbelief, assuming she would fail to make a meaningful point. Others, recalling her previous performance, waited in quiet anticipation. The judge nodded, allowing her to proceed, and the room fell into a profound silence. She approached the piano, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The music started softly, almost as if it were a whisper, weaving a story of struggle, resilience, and quiet determination. Each note carried emotion, expressing feelings that words could not adequately convey. The melody flowed with purpose, reflecting the journey she had endured, the long nights of practice. The isolation and the constant challenge of facing a world that underestimated her. She felt her heart beat in rhythm with the music, and the room seemed to respond. The atmosphere charged with attention and emotion as the performance continued. The music grew in complexity and intensity. Rapid sequences reflected moments of anxiety and confrontation, while slow, deliberate passages conveyed patience, contemplation, and perseverance. Her fingers danced over the keys with precision and grace, transforming emotion into sound. Every phrase told a part of her story, revealing the truth of her character and the depth of her dedication. The audience, initially skeptical, began to lean forward. Drawn into the narrative that unfolded without a single spoken word, she could feel the shift in energy as the room responded. The skeptical glances softened, the whispers ceased, and even those who had come to doubt her found themselves captivated by the honesty and authenticity of her performance. The music became a bridge, connecting her inner world with the hearts and minds of the listeners. It was more than a display of skill. It was a revelation of truth, resilience, and integrity that could not be ignored throughout the performance. She remained focused and deliberate, letting every note, every pause, and every variation express the nuances of her journey. She conveyed the fear of judgment, the frustration of being misunderstood, the perseverance required to overcome obstacles, and the quiet satisfaction of proving oneself through dedication and honesty. The piano became an extension of her voice, speaking in a language that transcended skepticism and reached directly to the hearts of those present. As the music reached its peak, she poured all her energy into the final passages, creating a sense of resolution and triumph. The room seemed to pulse with the rhythm of her story, and she could feel the impact of every note on the listeners. Faces that had once been filled with doubt now reflected attention, respect, and a growing recognition of the strength and authenticity she embodied. The performance, though silent in words, spoke volumes about her character, resilience, determination. When the final note faded, an almost tangible silence filled the courtroom. It was a silence heavier than any argument, more profound than any testimony. The weight of disbelief had lifted, replaced by a recognition that something remarkable had been revealed. People shifted, uncertain how to respond, yet deeply moved by the authenticity and courage they had witnessed. The piano had spoken in a way that no words, no documents, and no arguments could replicate, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. The judge, after a brief pause, acknowledged the power of her performance. The lawyers and witnesses exchanged glances, silently noting that her demonstration had conveyed truths that could not have been captured otherwise. The atmosphere in the room had transformed, and it was clear that perceptions were shifting. The act of expressing herself through music had done more than reveal her skill. It had communicated her honesty, dedication, and unwavering character. In the days following the hearing, the impact of her performance spread quietly but steadily. People who had once doubted her began to see her in a new light. Friends and acquaintances who had questioned her abilities now expressed support and admiration. Strangers who had been skeptical became curious and interested in her journey. Even some of her opponents, though they did not openly admit it, began to reconsider their assumptions. The piano had become a symbol of truth and perseverance, demonstrating that genuine expression could transcend judgment and skepticism. She continued to practice and compose. Understanding that her journey was ongoing, each melody she created reflected a part of her experience, capturing the emotions and lessons she had learned along the way. The piano remained her companion and her voice, guiding her through challenges and offering a means of communication that was both profound and undeniable. Through music, she discovered a sense of empowerment, realizing that her ability to express herself authentically was a gift that could influence and inspire others. Her days were filled with reflection, preparation, and the ongoing development of her skills. She played not just to prove herself, but to explore the depths of her emotions and to connect with others on a level that transcended words. The piano became a mirror, reflecting her growth, resilience, and inner strength. She had learned that the act of expressing truth through music required patience, dedication, and courage, but the rewards were profound, affecting both her own sense of self and the perceptions of those around her. Through it all, she remained humble and grounded, aware that recognition and approval were secondary to the act of being true to oneself. She understood that life would continue to present challenges, doubts, and misunderstandings, but she also knew that she had discovered a source of strength that could not be diminished. The piano had taught her discipline, resilience, and the power of authentic expression, and she relied on these lessons as she prepared for the next stages of her journey. As she reflected on her experiences, she recognized the profound impact that patience, perseverance, and belief in oneself could have. She had faced doubt, skepticism, and judgment, yet she had remained steadfast, allowing her music to convey truths that words alone could not. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative, providing her with a deeper understanding of herself and the world around her. She realized that the challenges she had faced were not obstacles to be avoided, but opportunities to demonstrate courage, authenticity, and resilience. In the quiet moments after each practice session, she allowed herself to feel gratitude for the piano, the discipline it had instilled, and the ability it had given her to communicate on a level that transcended words. She knew that her journey was far from over, but she had discovered a method of facing challenges with grace, strength, and unwavering commitment. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a voice, a teacher, and a symbol of the resilience that had carried her through doubt, disbelief, and adversity. The courtroom was unusually quiet that day, the kind of silence that carries anticipation and uncertainty together. She walked in, holding herself with quiet confidence, aware that the room was full of people whose opinions had been formed before they even knew her. Some watched with skepticism, others with curiosity, but all eyes seemed to be on her. She felt the weight of their judgments, yet it did not break her resolve. She had prepared for this moment in ways that went beyond legal arguments. She had prepared with every note she had ever played, every hour she had spent with the piano. Every moment she had faced doubt and risen above it. The proceedings began with the usual formalities, but the energy in the room was different. People whispered quietly, casting subtle glances at her. The lawyers for the opposing side presented their arguments with vigor, hoping to sway the opinion of the judge and the observers. Yet, she remained composed, absorbing each word, noting each point, and waiting for the moment she would reveal her truth. Words alone could not convey the depth of her journey, and she knew it. but the piano could. When it was her turn, she asked the judge once more if she could present her perspective through her music. There were murmurs of surprise and curiosity. Some people exchanged glances, unsure of what to expect. The judge nodded, allowing her to proceed. Recognizing that this was an extraordinary approach, but one that might reveal the truth in a way no testimony could. She approached the piano, feeling a mixture of calmness and intensity. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys, ready to speak without speaking. She began to play, letting the first notes carry a story of vulnerability and uncertainty. The melody flowed with subtlety, capturing the struggles she had faced growing up, the isolation she had endured, and the constant challenge of proving her worth in a world that often underestimated her. The room seemed to lean in, each listener caught by the authenticity that emanated from the music. Her hands moved with precision, yet the emotion in each note was unmistakable. She was telling her story, and for the first time, it was being heard without prejudice. As she continued, the music grew more intricate, weaving together themes of perseverance, courage, and determination. Rapid sequences reflected moments of fear and confrontation, while slower passages revealed patience, reflection, and the quiet power of inner strength. Each chord resonated with the weight of her experiences, speaking truths that had been overlooked, dismissed, or misunderstood. The courtroom, filled with judgment and skepticism, was now united in attention, unable to ignore the power of her performance. She could see the change happening in the room. Faces that had been doubtful or dismissive softened, eyes widened with interest, and even those who had come expecting her to fail found themselves captivated. The music became a bridge, connecting her inner world to the hearts of those who had doubted her. Each note, each pause, each phrase communicated honesty, integrity, and the depth of her preparation. It was as if the piano itself was advocating on her behalf. Telling a story that could not be twisted or ignored, her performance reached moments of high intensity, expressing triumphs and the victories that had come from patience and resilience. The music spoke of nights spent practicing alone, challenges she had faced in a world that often overlooked quiet determination, and the relentless belief she had maintained in her own abilities. The room was absorbed, each listener feeling the emotional truth of the story being shared through her fingers. She was no longer just playing. She was revealing the core of who she was and what she had endured. The climax of her performance brought together the various themes she had conveyed throughout the piece. There were moments of boldness and confidence, interwoven with delicate and tender passages that reflected vulnerability. Each listener could interpret the story in their own way, yet the overarching message was clear. She was honest, capable, and deserving of recognition. The music left no room for misunderstanding, no space for doubt, and no avenue for dismissal. She had finally found a way to communicate her truth in a way that could not be ignored. When the final note lingered and then faded, a profound silence filled the courtroom. The impact of her music was tangible, and the room seemed suspended in a collective realization. People shifted in their seats, unsure how to respond, yet deeply moved by the authenticity they had witnessed. The piano had not only conveyed skill and talent, but had revealed character, resilience, and integrity. For the first time, the room was united in recognition of her truth. The judge, after a pause that felt like an eternity, acknowledged the significance of her performance. The lawyers and witnesses, too, seemed to grasp the depth of what they had experienced. Skepticism had given way to understanding, doubt to respect, and curiosity to admiration. She had proven that authenticity, dedication, and the courage to communicate in one's own way could overcome the weight of prejudice and judgment. The piano had become more than an instrument. It had been a vessel of truth, bridging the gap between her experience and the perception of others. In the aftermath of the hearing, people approached her quietly, expressing their admiration and newfound understanding. Friends who had doubted now offered support. Strangers were curious about her journey, and even some of her former opponents reconsidered their assumptions. The impact of her performance extended beyond the courtroom, inspiring others to recognize the power of dedication, courage, and authentic expression. She had faced doubt, skepticism, and judgment, and had emerged with dignity and strength. Leaving a lasting impression on everyone present, she continued to practice and refine her music. Understanding that her journey was ongoing, each melody she created reflected her experiences, her emotions, and her growth. The piano remained her voice, her companion, and her teacher, guiding her through challenges and helping her express truths that could not be captured in words alone. Through this process, she discovered a profound sense of empowerment, realizing that her ability to communicate authentically could influence and inspire others. Her daily life was now filled with reflection, preparation, and creativity. She composed new pieces, each one capturing aspects of her journey and the lessons she had learned. The piano became a mirror of her resilience and determination, reflecting her growth and the strength she had cultivated over the years. She had learned that true courage often required patience, perseverance, and the willingness to reveal oneself authentically, even in the face of doubt and skepticism. Through all of this, she remained humble, aware that recognition was not the goal but a byproduct of living truthfully. She understood that life would continue to present challenges, but she now possessed a method of facing them with grace, strength, and unwavering belief in herself. The piano had become an extension of her identity, a tool for expressing truth, and a symbol of the resilience that had carried her through years of doubt and disbelief. As time passed, her story became known more widely. People spoke of the woman whose piano had silenced the courtroom, whose courage had transcended skepticism, and whose dedication had revealed the depth of her character. She did not seek fame or recognition. She sought only to communicate authentically and to live according to her principles. Yet the impact of her journey was undeniable, inspiring others to recognize the power of patience, perseverance, and the courage to express one's truth.